Hi, Guy. Tonight we stroll back to that world where your breath freezes in the morning air and your hands start to hurt before the sun climbs over the hedges. This year was around 1250, in the heart of winter, in medieval England, on the edge of a muddy country meadow. You shivered in front of a half-minus collapsed log cabin. Frost has crept into every corner of your world, shining on the straw and freezing the fur of the cow at beside it hard. If you can't find a way to keep warm, you are very likely to make it through this winter. So before you feel comfortable, please take a moment to like and subscribe to the video. But only if you really enjoy what I'm doing here. Tell me where you are in the world and what time it is now. Now, dim the lights. Relax your shoulders and imagine yourself breathing in the mist at a cold dawn. When you woke up, you heard the cawing of crows, breaking the silence above the silvery rhythm of the fields. The sky is light grey, and your blanket is nothing but a rough wool sheet. The coldness seeped in through every thread. You can almost hear the sound of ice on the thatched roof above your head. Somewhere outside the fence, a small stream is locked beneath a thin layer of milky white crust. You might wonder how someone managed to build something strong enough to withstand such a situation. Before the advent of comfortable stone walls and sturdy chimneys, most people in medieval England lived in fragile temporary shelters. These houses were built more by demand than by knowledge. Soil, straw, wood and luck are your tool. The earliest villagers shaped the soil itself into a safe form, dug shallow pits, piled up mow under rest, and layered what they had. It is easy for people to forget that shelter does not always mean safety. When you put your hand into the damp soil, it clung to your skin, and the same chill seeped into your bones. The stories believe that the earliest medieval houses in the English countryside were what we call cross-frame cottages, with huge curved timbers forming the ribs of the buildings. They are usually filled with mud, a sticky mixture made of soil, clay, straw and animal manure. The smell might make you wrinkle your nose, but it does work. Once it dries, it can resist the wind very well, allowing it to live inside and die outside. Despite this, the debate over how long these city walls could last before they began to collapse back to the ground continues. It might be strange to imagine that the soil under your boots could also serve as your insulating material. You trudge through the frost, walking towards a nearby cluster of small houses. You can feel the earth beneath your feet changing where the fire has melted the snow. It becomes muddy where no one walks. It is covered with frozen clouds. The indoor air was filled with the smell of smoke and damp wood. There were no windows, only a small hole above the fireplace to let the worst smoke escape. Even so, the air was still thick, and the heavy ash stung your eyes. On some nights, when the snow piled up and the door froze, the only light was the dim orange glow of the embers beneath the ashes. People sat very close together, shoulder to shoulder, and held their breaths with both hands to keep warm. Only here will you start to understand the miracle of getting through this season. You might envy the warmth of the wolf, curled up in your fur outside. Have you heard of stories about some villages that completely vanished after a harsh winter? Their cottages were buried under the snow until only the chimney columns were exposed. However, life goes on. Every spring they would rebuild, making repairs and restorations with whatever was available on the ground. If the roof collapses, they will add new straw. If the wall cracked, they would apply more mud on it. This is a lasting rhythm, just like the frost itself, unchanging. A strange little fact is that some parts of the early residences were buried underground, almost like caves. This helps to keep warm and block the wind, but when fall comes, it is also very easy to be submerged. Archaeologists have discovered the traces of these sunken houses in ancient British settlements, whose outlines have formed ghostly ring-minus-like structures beneath modern soil. Whether they are comfortable shelters or damp nightmares remains a subject of academic debate. You squatted beside the fire pit, listening to the hissing sound of the wet wood burning. The smell of smoke lingers on your clothes, which is a sign of survival. In medieval life, smoking was not merely a nuisance. It is a tool. Without the chimney, smoke filled the entire room, swirling beneath the beams and killing the insects on the thatched roof. Villagers may often blink, but they also know that it can prevent rotten pests. Strangely enough, the suffocating smoke is quietly protecting your home. When night fell again and the temperature dropped so rapidly, you could hear Mushi's protest. The stars seemed clearer and closer, as if the world itself were fragile. You lay beneath the rough blanket, listening to the wind's fingers dragging back and forth over the cracks in your heart. Your breath became blurred in the darkness, a tiny, fleeting ghost that vanished before you could see it twice. Somewhere in this quiet place, you sensed the beginning of creativity, a spark that will turn a small house into a small house into a ceremony, and a simple flame into a large fireplace centuries later. But now you are a villager on frozen land, surrounded by the smell of soil, smoke and damp straw. You pulled your cloak tighter, waiting for the faintest light of dawn. You knew that tomorrow you must find a better shelter, or else you would freeze to death. The strength of the wind, the changes of the smoke. You wander between wakefulness and sleep, trapped in a fragile warm bubble which is carved out from the endless cold. The next morning, the world was still a vast expanse of white and silent. You opened your eyes and smelled the cold soil and the never-mind's completely extinguished ashes. The frost adheres to your walls, as delicate as lace, and every breath you take feels like swallowing fog. You crawled out of the blanket and pressed your hand against the door that held the cottage together. It gives the impression of being both strong and fragile, like skin made of the land itself. Before the British learned to shape perfect stones or fire-fired bricks, they turned into mud. Everywhere is mud, free and easy, and surprisingly smart. When mixed with straw, it turns into what builders call cob, thick and heavy, and very warm. Once it's dry, grab a handful and feel the grains of sand sliding between your fingers. The faint warmth, left by yesterday's fire. It gives off a faint smell of hay and fertilizer, which is the scent of survival. Imagine hundreds or even thousands of hands like yours at work, wrapping the soil with weaving rods, flattening it, and mending the cracks that keep opening up due to the ice and frost. This is how the shelter began. It's not some grand plan, but a desperate improvisation. People build with what they have, not what they want. Historians believe that these early mud walls were several feet thick and worn, or like miniature cliffs than buildings. They will rise slowly, layer upon layer, and dry up in the rare winter sun. It may take several weeks for a small house to become sturdy and stand the test of the weather. Therefore, people often camp beside their unfinished houses to add fuel to the fire that will be moved indoors in the future. The traces of these buildings are still hidden beneath the English village, where the old foundations have never been completely removed. You listen to the rhythm of work, the sound of your hands slapping the soil, the creaking of the straw under your feet, and the humming of the cold wind passing through the semi-finished walls. Every sound is a part of the language you already know. Healed or freeze, work or die. A strange but true rumor in history. Sometimes people mix the blood of animals into their necks to strengthen it. Cow blood is highly regarded for its binding power, even though it can turn walls blackened, give off an iron-like smell when it rains. Is this superstition or science? Scholars are still debating whether it is truly helpful, or if it merely makes builders feel protected by the spirit of their group. You look up at your half-finished roof, wondering what the first builders will think when the snow comes earlier. The thatched roofs were uneven and the beams were crooked. Cold air slipped in through the gaps like something alive. Even so, this is still better than sleeping outdoors. Inside, smoke enveloped the ceiling, blackening it like a painting depicting the night sky. The floor covered with dirt is cold, but your boots are very sturdy. Someone laid some turf from last summer to soften the ground. They make a rustling sound when you move. The smell is as faint and sweet as dry high-end riverbanks. When the walls are new, villagers often press small amulets or broken pottery onto the clay, which is a secret gift for the house itself. Some people say that they can drive away frost spirits. Others claim that they make the walls remember the warmth of summer. Modern archaeologists occasionally discover these hidden artifacts, such as a child's head, a bent nail, and a chicken bone buried between the soil layers. No one knows exactly what they mean. Perhaps it's hope, perhaps it's habit. You watched the oldest man in the village repair a wall with a flashlight. His fingers were erect and his breathing was shallow, but his movements were very definite. He knows which color of soil dries out most easily. The method of twisting the straw to make it firm. He told you that the secret of construction is to change with the seasons. In spring, walls should be built before the harvest. Roofs should be covered and before the second frost in winter. Repairs should be made. If one is missing, the whole family will shed tears for a whole year. At night, the temperature dropped again. You could see a faint steam rising from the wall. The heat of the day was dissipating, and the mud was released into the air once more. The wind howled around the doorframe, and you stuffed a piece of cloth into the crack of the door. You sat by the stove, gazing at its heart, watching the tiny sparks crackle and disappear, just like thoughts you would never speak out loud. A refuge made of mud will never exist. They were originally intended to serve one generation, perhaps two, and then melt back into the fields. This is their beauty. A house born from the land will one day return to the land. However, the people living inside are not temporary. Their stories linger in the soil, just as the villages in England still gather low with the wind, just as the names of some places sound like the ground itself. Crane, Madford, Ditchenham. When you settle down and the fire flows low, you begin to understand why people call this land home instead of England. Every handful of mud you fill on the wall carries the warm memories of your body, a promise that you might still be alive tomorrow. Outside, the stars were burning coldly above the village. Inside, your little hut breathes slowly and steadily, its breathy skin blocking the darkness. You gradually enter a half-asleep, half-awake state. The smell of damp oil and smoke lingers in your hair. In a brief and fragile moment, winter is almost kind. Before you saw these people, the sound of the axe had already pierced through the frozen forest. Every loud bang rang out in the silent errand echo among the bare oak trees. You walked towards the noisy place, your boots crunching on the frost-bitten leaves. The scent of sap and cold bark fills your lungs, fresh and bitter. In this green forest, people come here to collect bones from their families. Wood is life. Without it, there would be no walls, no roofs, and no hope of surviving the next snowstorm. Records from this period show that each village had its own woodland. A person who knows how to interpret the forest, he can tell by touching which tree will split neatly, which will twist and which will stand firm for decades. In the days when metal nails were not yet widespread, these skills meant everything. The joining of wood to wood relies on ingenuity, not on metal. Nails, wedges and grooves held the hut firmly together like modern screws. When a beam of light fell, the air hummed, and the sound of fibers splitting was accompanied by chews. You helped drag the wood through the mud. It left marks like wounds in the frost. Each box should be marked with an advertisement, nailed to a pillar, and then lifted into place. The rhythm is slow and definite. This is the voice of community building itself, piece by piece. The smell of freshly cut out is almost sweet, mixed with sweat and smoke from heating. There is a strange superstition that trees should never be cut down in silence. Someone must speak to it first to warn the soul inside. They believe that if trees are cut down without respect, it will curse the construction workers. Even in the following centuries, some carpenters would gently put the tree trunks and whisper apologies before felling trees. Imagine a small ceremony under a heavy snowfall, with words rising like a thin mist, and the forest listening. Archaeological discoveries have confirmed many medieval houses were built of wood, with their skeletons made of oak or elm, and in some counties in the south, sometimes even chestnuts. These joints are quite large, and the wood is handcrafted, piecing together like a jigsaw puzzle. The whole family and neighbors will get together within a day to erect the frame. If the food permits, there will be a grand feast next, although usually the celebration is as thin as the soup in the pot. The smell of roasted onions and firewood smoke wafts through the trees, reminding everyone that warmth can be earned. Not all wood is taken at will. Forest laws, especially in royal territories, are strict. Cutting down trees without permission may mean a hefty fine, enough to ruin a family. Some records show that farmers sneaked into the woods at night. The axe was wrapped in cloth and a log was stolen to make the roof beam. The adventure is worth it. A fine is better than freezing to death. Scholars are still discussing how many medieval forests in England have truly vanished due to human needs. Some people believe that by the 12th century, half of this land had been cleared. Others, however, believe that large minor-scale deforestation occurred later, because more fuel was needed for iron smelting and shipbuilding. No matter what the truth is, you can feel the fear of scarcity from every cautious cut. When you walk among the tree stumps, you will notice some miracles happening quietly. Even if the trees fall, the forest seems to have the hope of rebirth. Where the branches broke, tiny buds emerged from the snow. Replication, an ancient practice that is still used in some places, enables new growth from the same roots. The villagers learned to cut the wood carefully so that it could come back in a few years. This was an early form of sustainable development, not stemming from virtue but from despair. By the afternoon, the workers had piled up the wood and wiped their faces with their rough sleeves. Frost sparkled on their beards. You can see your breath, along with theirs, turn into little clouds and disappear into the pale light. Someone was humming a tune, soft and low, the kind that maintained rhythm rather than melody. These tools are very heavy. Due to years of use, the handles have been worn very smooth. Every strike was intentional, just like a promise carved on an oak tree. Back in the village, the logs were neatly trimmed and piled up near the half-built hut. The children were running around between the beams of the house, pretending to be nobles and knights. The women carried bundles of straw, and their skirts were stiff from the cold. A dog was sleeping beside a pile of shavings, with its nose hidden under its tail. The air was filled with the smell of wood resin and wet wool. Although it was very cold, it was still very comfortable. There is ample evidence that British builders often reuse the wood from old houses. When a family moves or when a storm destroys a small house, the beams will be pulled apart and transported to the next location. Today, you can still find medieval houses whose wood is reused and covered with smoke stains from previous fires. Each crossbeam preserves the memory of another winter. As night fell, the last truckload of timber was towed home by a cow. Flip the stream with your side hand. The animals exhaled masses of steam. The frozen puddles reflected the red glow of the setting sun, and the path sparkled. You can feel the weight of the wood on your shoulders. Not only its quality, but also its significance. Each beam is a wall of the future, a roof and a boundary between warmth and death. You stopped at the edge of the field and glanced back at the forest. It is dark and endless, being both an enemy and a savior. The cold seeped in again, but your heart felt more stable. These construction workers did what humans always do when facing winter. They turned the biological world into a refuge, one tree at a time. You pushed open the curtain and walked into your own little room. The flames flickered low, licking the charred wood. You stretch out your hands to feel that faint warm currents spreading over your arms. Outside, the wind begins to rise. You imagine the forest moaning softly, reshaping itself in the night. Somewhere in this sound lies the heartbeat of medieval England, a world filled with wood, frost and endless patience. Snowflakes began to swirl down slowly and slowly, softening the sharp edges of the village. You step out of your half-finished shelter, raise your head and let the snowflakes melt on your skin. They melt faster than you might think, leaving faint cold traces around you and vanishing in an instant. Will the roof sag under the heavy weight of fresh snow? Their golden thatch has now turned into an uneven white. This is a test that every family must face. It is well known that the thatched roofs of the Middle Ages were both an art and a form of gambling. If handled properly, a thatched roof could last for 2 or 3 decades. If not done well, it might collapse in the first heavy rain. You stroked the pile of straw waiting by the wall with your hand. It made a faint squeaking sound under your fingers, dry and brittle. Each stem must be selected according to its length. After harvest, it should be tied tightly and stored to prevent moisture. When the time was ripe, Thatcher worked like a musician, stacking the reeds layer by layer at a rhythm that only she herself could understand. The air smells a little sweet, just like a hay barn in summer. In the depth of winter, this is a strange comfort. The new roof tied up with willow twigs sparkled with golden light under the greyish light. You climb up a small ladder and peek under the thatch. Seeing the maze made of branches and straw, even mice couldn't squeeze in. However, water can always get in some way. Every storm is a test of faith. You might laugh at the strange detail that some villagers think the spider on the thatched roof is a symbol of good luck. They said that their nets helped hold the straw together. Pushing them over might bring rain. So when you notice a fat little spider crawling near the eaves, just leave it alone. Say thank you gently, just as your grandmother once did. Archaeological investigations show that the roofs in the north of England are steeper than those in the south. The reason is very simple. Rain and snow need a place to go. The steep roof can rain water quickly, keeping the straw dry for a longer time. In the softer southern climate, roofs are lower and thicker to withstand long periods of drizzle. Every Margaret Thatcher had her own secret tricks, a knotting pattern and a tilting angle. Few people write them down. These skills are passed down from memory, guided by calloused fingers to be passed down by the young. This job is very dangerous. You imagine Mrs. Thatcher keeping her balance on the ridge in the cold wind, her hands red and cracked. He precisely bound each bundle referred to as leaf sheaths and patted them with a flat oar to keep them level. The sound was rhythmic and almost pleasant, reverberating across the vast fields. Hello, someone was stirring a thin pot of stew, and the smell of smoke wafted up towards him. In the church records, it is mentioned that the fire started from the thatched roof and was sometimes caused by a spark carried by the wind. Rows upon rows of small houses might disappear overnight. Some parishes even prohibit chimneys near thatched roofs to prevent disasters. Construction workers tried to use clay tiles along the ridge, hoping to slow the spread of the fire, but in most villages, straw remains the only option. It is cheap, warm and tolerant. The villagers trusted it, even if it betrayed them. Researchers are still questioning how such a fragile material can withstand the test of weather for centuries. The answer partly lies in maintenance. Every year, every household climbs onto the rooftops, repairs holes, clears moss and tightens ropes. The thatched roof is not a single architectural act, but a continuous relationship. You don't just live under your own roof, you care about it, as if it were alive. In your little house, you can hear the snow sliding down the slope and making a faint hissing sound as it lands in the mud. The roof breathes with the change of weather and creaks as the straw settles. You can smell the smoke mixed with the damp straw, a scent sticking to your clothes. It has no unpleasantness, and the simple, familiar and life-like atmosphere, anchored to the land and labour. In some parts of East Anglia, there used to be a strange little tradition of placing a roof charm under a ridge pole, a hidden amulet made of woven rush or carved wood. This is to protect the homeland from the storm. Centuries later, some such talismans were discovered. They had turned black but remained intact, hidden within the framework of old houses like quiet worshippers. Some experts believe that they originated from paganism. Others claim that they are merely symbols of good luck. No one can give a definite answer, but it's not hard to imagine that Thatcher would have pinned someone there and whispered something that even he himself wouldn't believe. The snow has thickened. The thatch drowned out the sound of the wind, making its often transforming the sharp gusts into low whispers. You can almost hear the house adapting, adjusting and living in its own way. A gentle fire burst out, sending sparks towards the smoke exhaust hole. Each flash is reflected on the low ceiling, painting a brief golden shape before fading. Outside, the world is pure white. The inside is brown and smoky, while the middle is warm. He sat by the stove, listening to the roof talking to itself. The air was thick and filled with steam from the cooking pot. Someone was smiling quietly, a weary voice, feeling brave in the darkness. You realize that survival is not only about strength, but also about rhythm, slow and patient repair, never stopping. When you finally close your eyes, you imagine the snow melting in the morning, slowly dripping from the straw and drying up by noon. You imagine the spider weaving again, its tiny legs dancing in the smoke-filled air. Life goes on, sustained by strings, straws and unwavering beliefs. Somewhere high up, the thatch is still breathing. The morning light was hazy and the smoke was curling. The pale sun attempted to rise from the frosty mist, and its light filtered through the hole above the fireplace. The fire had turned into red embers, humming quietly beneath the grey ashes. You stir it with a stick and watch it wake up like a heartbeat. The room was filled with the fragrance of peat and burning oak. That warm feeling was earned, not given. Ancient documents well record that the fireplace was the center of every medieval family. It is not only a source of heat, but also a source of life. Fire can be used for cooking, drying clothes, warming newborns, and serving as a light source for a long time after the sun sets. Without it, there would only be darkness and disease. In winter, the fireplace becomes the only place to survive, and every decision in the house revolves around keeping it alive. The stove was not large, it was just a shallow pit filled with stones and ashes. The smoke rose, swirled over the roof beams, and then escaped through a small hole in the thatched roof. Sometimes it simply can't escape. The air is getting thicker and thicker, and your eyes are stinging. You coughed, waved to smoke away, and smiled quietly. Everyone in your era is burdened with this. The walls are covered with soot, the ceiling is as black as charcoal, but the warmth seeps into your bones, and that's what matters most. Most chroniclers of that era described how cigarettes became an uninvited guest that no one dared to drive away. It disinfects the air, prevents insects from building nests, and dries wood to prevent rot. Even if people complain about coughing and tearing, they understand the hidden value of this smoked companion. This gave their family a strange immunity. You might find it strange that in some villages, the fire in the fireplace never goes out completely. If it goes out, people believe it will bring misfortune or even death. Borrow a piece of coal from a neighbor to light it and place it in a moss-covered earthenware pot to keep it molded. Imagine the scene of that dark red light sweeping across the snow. Warm promises were passed from one house to another. Archaeological excavations have unearthed ancient heart sign, sometimes engraved with crosses or small circles. No one really knows whether they are religious symbols or simple decorations. Some experts believe that these marks are a kind of blessing, intended to protect the sacred flame itself. In that era, when fire could save or destroy, people regarded it as a living god. The size and shape of a fireplace often indicate the status of a family. Wealthier families build their rooms in the center of the floor, which is large enough for the whole family to sit around together. The pits in poorer villages are smaller and only big enough to boil a pot of water. But wherever the fireplace is, it represents the rhythm of life. The time to eat depends on the time when the firewood burns, and the time to sleep depends on the time when the last ray of light turns into embers. In a 14th century chronicle, there is an engaging story about a village that suffered from severe freezing. It was said above that every household gathered fire in a large pit in the center of the square. The family members slept side by side, their faces illuminated by a shared flame. It is still unknown whether this story is true or just a legend, but this image has been passed down. The fire of the entire community flickered in the cold darkness. Some historians believe that the location of fireplaces influenced the evolution of medieval architecture. Houses without chimneys must allow smoke to escape through the hole in the center of the roof, which means there are no higher floors. It was not until several centuries later, when chimneys appeared, that houses became tolerant rooms piled up like layers of warm currents. The fireplace gave way to the fireplace, and the fire itself became a framed spectacle rather than a smoking survival tool. You sat beside your own pit and added a small log. The flames licked the edges, making a gentle cracking sound. This voice was steady and comforting, just like the pulse of the earth. You can feel the heat radiating outward and the coldness receding inch by inch. You held your hand tightly, and the palm was pink in the sunlight. The smoke rose like a ghost, carrying the smell of resin, old stew and a hint of charred wool. It filled this small space with its own music. Every family has its own ceremony. Before going to bed, some people would carefully rake the ashes onto the fire to keep the coal burning until the next morning. In some areas, this is called ring the fire, which means to suffocate gently. Just do it now, slowly pressing the ashes into a circle. Feel the warmth gradually fade away, turning into a drowsy buzzing sound. The house darkens, but it is still full of vitality, and the air is filled with comfort and soot. Some early texts even described the use of dried animal manure as fuel when wood was scarce. Thinking of this, you wrinkled your nose, but once it burns, the heat it emits is stable and clean. Nothing was wasted. Everything has become a part of survival. That smell was initially very pungent, but gradually turned into a familiar earthy smell. In a strange way, it blends with the scent of life itself. That night, as you lay on the mat, the flames from the fireplace dyed the walls under. The shadow moved gently on the ceiling, and you felt the rhythm of the flames in your breath. Outside, the wind is grasping the thatch, but inside it is silent. You listen to the faint crackling sound of dying embers and the whisper of smoke sliding into the cold sky. The stove, your companion, like a tired animal, gently sighs as it prepares to fall asleep. Close your eyes and be grateful. Every spark is a heartbeat. Every flash is a promise that winter has yet to win. The fire is humming, ancient and loyal, the first friend of mankind. Before dawn, the chill crept in through the cracks again. You were awakened by a faint whistling sound, the sound of air squeezing through the twisted wooden loose thatch. It gives people a sense of being alive. A cunning guest slipped in through the tiniest crack. You sat up, pulled your cloaked iter and touched the door edge with your fingers. The wood has swollen due to moisture and is now crookedly embedded in the frame. When you push it away, the frost falls down like a glittering thin sheet. Contemporary records describe how medieval farmhouses struggled against the natural environment. The construction workers did what they could with limited tools. But the wood would shrink, the soil would sinking, the roof would sag. Most of the time, the floor was bare and densely pressed by the sounds of countless footsteps. Only the wealthier villagers would lay down rush grass or straw and change it once a week. When it began to rot, the cold climbed up from the ground, like a ghost that refused to be buried. When you closed the door again, it moaned, a weary sound belonging to both the woods and the wind. You stuff a stone at the bottom and lock it up. The floor beneath your feet feels colder than the air itself. You can imagine frost beneath the rush grass. Will you get too close? The little crystal will bite your tongue. The air was filled with the damp smell of straw, smoke and earth. This is not unpleasantness but honesty, the scent of living on the edge of the world. There used to be a strange family trick to stop cross-miners' flow. The villagers filled the gaps in the walls with wool or moss soaked in animal fat. When it dries, it hardens and blocks the wind from outside. Sometimes, a feather or a small charm is stuffed into the crack for good luck. Some folklore sites now call them wish plugs. Centuries later, they were discovered in ancient house beams, which are tiny fossils of hope. It is recorded that most farmers live in a house where humans and animals share. The family slept in one corner, and the goats and chickens slept in another corner. Their warmth made the air still bearable. If luck permits, a raised wooden platform can serve as a bed, but usually you just lie on the straw. The floor itself is a part of daily life, a workbench, a dining area, and sometimes on the coldest nights, it serves as a cemetery for frozen livestock. For a long time, researchers have been debating how people endure the situation. Some people think that the bodies in the Middle Ages were stronger because they were often exposed outdoors. Others, however, believe that hunger and fatigue reduce the discomfort. No matter what the reason is, life goes on. At that time, people knew how to layer their world, isolating themselves with habits and acceptance rather than blankets. You squatted beside the nearly extinguished fire and added another small stick. The flame climbed up unwillingly, its light trembling on the smoke miner's blackened wall. The door is ringing again. Every gust of wind makes the hinges make a whoosh sound, and you can also hear the faint humming of the air pushing back and forth under the roof. You imagine the thatched roof of the moving slightly, releasing small snowflakes into the room. One landed on your sleeve and melted into a tiny wet ring. A rather unexpected custom was recorded in several parish notes in Yorkshire. Some families hang dried herbs on their doors, believing that they can calm the wind down. Weave ropes with rosemary, mint, or garlic. It may not have blocked the through wind, but it made the rooms smell cleaner and added a touch of vitality to the grey winter air. You can imagine the fragrance blending with the smoke, a fragile sweetness fighting against the cold bitterness. When someone moves behind you, the floor will clump. It is uneven and worn down by the passage of time. His wooden boards are both rare and precious, having been picked up from older ruins or the remains of carriages. Your hand walks along the road, feeling the marks left by time and the barefoot children. In some houses, people spread sand on the soil to absorb moisture and sweep it away every morning. Simple, practical, quiet and ingenious. Some early builders attempted to use raised stone thresholds to prevent water and wind from climbing in. Evidence from the ruins of ancient villages indicates that these buildings were usually constructed with stones from the fields or even fragments of old grinding stones. However, even these cannot stop the spread of the chill. Air always finds a way out. It's always like this. When you step out, the wind tugs at your cloak, sharp as a knife. The sun pierced through the clouds, painting the snow a dull silver. You look around at the small houses and find that each wall is a little tilted. Each door bends in a different way. Each roof is insufficiently tilted. However, all of these still stand firm. They endure through an ending, through habit, and through quiet stubbornness. Back in the house, you sit by the fireplace, studying the little details that bring the house to life. The ash on the door rose like a smoker. The floor was faintly dampened, the snow had melted. The wind streaks across your skin like invisible fingers. You tuck the blanket tighter, smiling and thinking that was enough. Life behind these high walls was not comfortable, but everyone enjoyed it. The family huddled together, their laughter and whispers gently echoing beneath the thatched roof. The floor might be cold, but the familiar sound warmed the space, something that fire couldn't compare with. You lay on the straw mat, watching the smoke drift towards the small hole in the roof. The last ray of sunlight of the day vanished into the embers. For a moment, you could almost believe that the cold had become milder, simply because you had learned to coexist with it. The wind has stopped. The air in the morning feels very heavy, filled with the smell of stone dust and smoke. You stepped out of the house and reached the rising edge of the village, where the pale walls were catching the faint light of the winter sun. Compared with those drooping cottages, it seems eternal, as if it had been carved directly from the bones of the earth. You move closer and run along the wall with your hands. The stone is cold, smooth and solidified, rough enough to scratch your fingertips. It gives a vivid feeling, as if the breathing is different from that of the wooden house behind you. It is certain that after the Norman conquest, stone rituals began to emerge in large numbers. The lords who owned them wanted to exist permanently and display their strength and wealth. Although farmers repair their houses with soil every year, these buildings are constructed to fight against time itself. City walls are usually built of limestone or sandstone, mined from nearby mountains and pulled for miles by oxen. The stonemasons shaped the stones with their hands, and their hammers echoed across the frozen fields. You will see a mason at work. When he raised the chisel and struck at a steady rhythm, his breath filled the air with steam. That sound spread throughout the yard like a heartbeat. Each strike will cut off a small piece of stone. Every snowflake is a fragment of history. Freshly cut limestone has a pungent smell, almost metallic. The mason stopped to warm himself by the brazier, and the orange glow was reflected on the half-miner's finished wall. An unusual fact that is often overlooked is that builders mix animal hair into lime plaster to make it stronger. These tiny fibers help bond the mixture and prevent cracks from appearing when the wall dries. This is an early reinforcement that was discovered long before people understood chemistry. If you bring your nose a little closer, centuries later, you can still smell the faint animal odor remaining on the old plaster. Archaeological evidence suggests that these stone walls might have been several feet thick. Inside, the cold has never truly left. The city wall that kept the enemy out also trapped the dampness and cold. The room was filled with the smell of wet stones and candle smoke, and the air stuck to you like a wet cloak. The nobles wrapped themselves in layer upon layer of fur, but even on long nights they would tremble. The fireplace, still a new invention in many houses, roars but has never reached a distant corner. The crackling sound of the fire filled the hall, but the warmth vanished before it could even touch the walls. Some experts believe that these ceremonial halls are not so much for comfort as for grandeur. Although the high ceiling is very beautiful, it is almost impossible to provide heating. The fire was burning fiercely, blackening the rafters. The guests were still sitting closely together, stretching out their hands, hoping for a little warmth. Now you can imagine the flickering of torches, the twinkling of cups, and the slow rhythm of breathing in the cold air. You've noticed the smell of the mortar. It's white and dry. Each stone bears the chisel marks of a mason. Some small symbols can be used to identify who cut them. Some are crosses, some are initials, or small shapes. Heimat is usually accomplished by calculating these markings. This is proof of a day's work. Imagine that centuries later, your fingers are sliding over them. It is still faintly visible under the dust. Every symbol is a whisper of the people who built this place. There is an interesting oddity in the records of witchcraft that tells us that the room was covered with colorful cloth to hide the dampness. Before tapestries became fashionable, people used linen to paint scenes of saints or hunting gatherings. They can both decorate and keep warm. As time goes by, the color fades, but the fabric softens the echo of the stone, giving people a warm illusion. Historians are still debating whether these early stone halls were true symbols of comfort or merely proud monuments. Some people believe that they offer true safety in the severe winter, and the thick walls can withstand storms. Some people also say that they are the cold prisons of their owners, beautiful yet suffocating. No matter what the truth is, these postures stand like frozen hearts in the scenery, faintly glowing under the glow of the firelight, while the fields lie dormant under the smoke. You enter the hall through an arch. The sound changed instantly, becoming softer and deeper. Your footsteps echoed on the stone slabs, which had been polished for hundreds of years. The light from the fireplace flickered on the walls, leaving golden streaks on the grey stones. Above, the beam of light vanished into the darkness, shrouded in smoke. There was a faint smell of salt and iron in the air, which was the residue left over from years of burning pit. A servant carried a bucket of ash past and scattered it on the icy path. This movement stirs up the dust and sparkles like little stars in the dim light. You can almost feel the warmth gathering around the fireplace in the center of the room, the slow pulsation of life within the stone shell. In a corner, you discovered something unexpected. A bunch of dried herbs is hung on a crossbeam. Even in the noble halls, superstition lingers on. Some people say that rosemary can drive away diseases, while others claim that it can lift the spirits of a family. No one questioned loudly. Tradition still has influence long after faith, and reason attempts to explain it. As night fell, you stepped out of the house again. The stone wall emitted an orange light from within, and there was a faint firelight behind the narrow window. The cold wind presses on your face, and the house stands above your head like a mountain, tenacious and unyielding. Now you understand that the magnificence of the manor does not lie in its comfort, but in its perseverance. It is a fortress against enemies in the merciless winter, and a monument to humanity's refusal to yield. The village below lay quietly, its rooftops covered with snow, and the smoke from the fireplace rose along the silver path. Take a deep breath and let the coldness bite your lungs. The posture behind you is silent, heady and eternal. Inside the room, someone pushed another piece of wood into the fire. In a brief moment, warmth flickered in the endless cold. As you walk from the manor towards a group of farmhouses below, morning mist shrouds the fields. The contrast is astonishing. Behind you, the stone walls of the main residence flickered slightly in the cold light, solid and confident. Ahead, smoke rose from the low roof. Each small house was close to the ground, as if bent over by the weight of winter. You can hear faint laughter mixed with coughing, and the familiar country music is still vivid. Medieval chroniclers often described the English countryside as an extreme hodgepodge. The lord's mansion and the peasant cottage are only a few hundred yards apart, but they belong to different worlds. The manor was brightly lit and the ironwork shone brightly. The thatched cottage was filled with the smell of firewood smoke and cabbage soup. However, both have an unshakable truth. The cold is ruthless. You push open the door of a farmhouse. It let out a groan, revealing a space no larger than a modern bedroom. The walls are made of top and talc, but have been patched with mud many times, just like the skins of some kind of large animal. The roof is very low and you have to lower your head. In the corner, a small fire was burning under an opening in the ceiling. The smoke was drifting lazily, reluctant to leave. A woman was stirring the pot over the flame, and the air was filled with the smell of onions and barley. Archaeological evidence confirms that such cabins are usually less than 20 feet long. The entire family, sometimes 6 or 7 people, sleep together in one room. 2 goats, and perhaps a cow, stayed on the other side of the wooden partition. Their breathing almost warmed the space like fire. The floor is a mixture of soil and straw and has become soft due to years of use. In folk tales there is sometimes a strange practice mentioned, that is, hanging old shoes above the door. People believe that they have trapped evil spirits or misfortunes that attempt to enter the house. Centuries later, when restorers restore old huts, they will still find these hidden shoes tucked away in the corners of beams or chimneys. It quietly reminds us that the fear of the invisible is as real as the fear of the cold. In the small house, the air felt very close, almost alive. The children slept under thick blankets, curled up like little cats. Mother hummed a tune softly, her voice blending with the crackling of the fire. You notice that the ceiling is covered with soot and the walls are flickering with uneven light. Here, smoke is swirling and it's dim, yet surprisingly peaceful. Every inch of land here is a necessity. Every object has a purpose. Historical records show that farmers made furniture from whatever they could find. A wooden board placed on the bucket is used as a table. The stool is carved from tree trunks. Her bed, if there is one, is a sack stuffed with straw spread on the floor. In many families, the most valuable thing is the iron pot passed down from generation to generation. Everything revolves around that pot. It can cook, heat water for washing, and even serve soup for patients. Some experts still question whether the gap between the lives of the nobility and those of the peasants is as large as the records show. Although the supplies vary, it is common to struggle against cold and hunger every day. Even in terms of etiquette, people dress neatly when they sleep. Even the king complained that the hall was too cold. Although the farmers' thatched cottages were simple and crude, they were sometimes warmer because their small rooms held better heat than any large ones. Comfort seems to be relative. You squat beside the fire, feeling the heat licking your hands. The smoke pricks your eyes and the aroma of the stew makes your stomach ache. The woman walked along with a slight smile. The wooden spoon slowly turned in circles. Steam rose gently and sparkled under the orange light. Behind her, the goat moved a little, snorted softly and stomped on the straw with its hoof. Life here is intimate, tangled and practical. In this way, the food is placed on polished plates under carved beams. Here for dinner, everyone shares one pot and eats with wooden spoons and fingers. However, the warmth in this small room is more profound and more humanized. The air was filled with laughter, coughs and whispers of prayer. A slice of bread is passed from hand to hand, and every crumb of bread makes people feel precious. A strange folk tale goes that villagers used to whistle gently while watching over fires, believing that this could keep the flames alert. Try it now. The low tone was almost inaudible. The children looked at you, giggling. This sound mingled with the cracking of wood and the sighing of the wind outside. Though the little house is small, it has become my own world. When you go out again, the air is like glass. The manor is perched on a mountain, quiet and proud, while the cottagers huddle together like animals to keep warm. These two types of families share the horizon of smoke and frost. They begin to understand that survival has nothing to do with caste or comfort, but is related to warmth, food and the closeness to each other. The sky darkened and the snow began to fall again, as light as ashes. You watched it land on the roof, the same white shrines covering the noble halls and the farmer's hut every key. For a brief moment, every family in the valley looked the same in the cold. Inside, flames flickered behind the tightly closed windows. The tiny human heart is fighting against the endless winter. You kneel beside a half-finished wall, with the cold wind carrying a faint smell of damp earth. At first glance, this building seems very fragile. The patterns made of branches and soil seem too fragile to withstand the test of the seasons. However, there is an undeniable elegance in its design. That is, the harmony between human needs and natural resources. You stroke its surface with your hand, feeling the texture of the hazelnut rods woven beneath a layer of brownish color, a rough-living skin that has endured countless winters. Archaeological discoveries indicate that the overall and multi-angle design was one of the most common architectural techniques in medieval England. It doesn't require a sawmill or a quarry. It only needs patience and an understanding of the local land. The wall is woven from flexible branches through upright wooden stakes, forming a grid that looks almost like fabric. Then mix clay, straw, animal manure and water into a paste and press it into the fabric to fill the gaps. Once dried, the surface becomes extremely hard. You can hear the faint squeaking sound of a young man bending the willow twigs into shape. The rhythm of this work is very gentle. Weave, press, smooth the claws. The smell of the earth and the faint sweetness of the straw blend together. A woman followed behind him, pressing the borka in place with her hands. Her fingers were smeared with brown paste. The air was cold, but work kept them warm. Every movement carries a quiet sense of urgency. This wall must be completely dry before dark, otherwise it will be cracked by frost in the morning. It is often mentioned in ancient guild records that this method lasted for centuries, not because it was simple but because it was effective. A perfect wall can be repaired endlessly. When cracks appear, they just fill them in again. For generations, people lived and died within the city walls that were rebuilt every winter, breathing in the rhythm of the seasons. A peculiar detail discovered in rural folk tales indicates that some builders mixed egg whites or even malt liquor in their homes, claiming that this would make the walls smoother and stronger. It is still uncertain whether this approach will work, but the scene of villagers pouring precious malt liquor into the mud for warmth largely indicates their priorities. The mixture of necessities and superstition, craftsmanship and faith, defines the framework of existence. Evidence from several excavations near ancient settlements confirmed that the outer surfaces of these walls were often plastered with lime. The bright coating reflects light, making the small interior appear larger and cleaner. It can also kill mold and pests. Now you can imagine that the sunlight shines on the pale walls, and the light turns the most humble hut into something almost sacred. Some researchers are still debating how these structures have withstood centuries of rain and snow. The popular theory is that their flexibility saved them. They do not resist the wind but bend with it, swaying slightly like trees. The same principle enables branches to survive storms and houses to survive the winter. Though not perfect, they are full of vitality. They are part of the same vibrant landscape that provides food and shelter for the builders. When you touch the wall again, small pieces of dry clay break under your fingers, revealing the woven rods beneath. You track their patterns. Every curve and twist has been meticulously designed. The light brown color feels smooth and cool. Even now, it still gives off a pale green scent, just like the memory of summer. Imagine yourself cutting down these branches, peeling off the bark, bending them on your knees, and snowflakes landing on your shoulders. The village is filled with a lively atmosphere. Someone was carrying a basket of straw and stirring. The children were collecting frozen mud lumps by the fire to thaw them. The dog sniffed the pile of manure and wagged its tail. Laughter and the sounds of labor mingled with the wind. The scene is so ordinary that you almost forget the danger of the season. However, every handful of soil and every woven branch is a contempt for the cold. In a corner of a long-minus abandoned small house, an unusual handprint was discovered. These handprints were left on the porch and were very likely left by children who helped their parents build the house. These footprints have been well preserved for hundreds of years. They speak louder than any words or chronicles. The intimacy of touch. Humans need to leave traces, even in the mud. As the sun set in the west, the newly built city walls shone brightly in the afterglow of the setting sun. It was getting dark and still damp, but very solid. The braided thread below captures the light like golden thread. A faint steam rose where moisture met cold air. Take a step back and appreciate it, not because of its beauty, but because of its tenacity. Family members working around you start collecting their tools. They washed their hands in a bucket of ice water, laughed at the mud marks on each other's faces, and shared a piece of bread crust. The wall behind them was humble yet solid. It won't last forever, but it will last long enough. In a world of endless winter, this is what everyone desires. You watch the last ray of light disappear from the horizon. The village fell silent, with only the faint noise of a fire being made at night. The wind slid along the new wall but couldn't get in. You smile and approach the warmth, realizing that although this wall is fragile, it is brimming with vitality in a way that stones can never achieve. It can bend, breathe and endure. It began to rain before sunrise, in a soft murmur rather than a rumbling sound. When you woke up, you heard the sound of it sliding across the thatched roof, like gentle fingertips tapping the walls of the roof. The air was soft and cold, filled with the damp smell of straw and smoke. Somewhere outside, a rooster was protesting against the weather, but its voice was obscured by the fog. You pulled your cloak tighter and glanced up. The roof moaned under the weight of water, then suddenly released, and a stream of water rushed down the slant. Historical architectural records show that the roofs of medieval England were a wonder of practical design. The steep gable walls you see in the old farmhouses today were not merely built for aesthetic purposes. Their shapes are designed to allow rain and snow to slide down quickly and protect the fragile thatch beneath. Their shallower roof might be submerged by a heavy rainstorm, but a sharp angle turns the rain into movement, a natural barrier against decay. You walked outside and felt cold water droplets hitting your face. The rooftops of the village sparkled like animal skins, dark and shiny. The drainage method of each pond is different, which depends on its construction method and maintenance conditions. The rain trickled down gently, and some rooftops made a buzzing sound. Others beat the drum like a shallow one. The entire village turned into a living weather instrument. A strange phenomenon was discovered in the old carpenters, mates, roof builders often work according to local superstitions. They avoid cutting down wood on certain days, believing that it would enrage the soul of the forest and might lead to leaks in the future. Whether by coincidence or wisdom, many roofs so carefully built had been passed down from generation to generation. You can imagine that the construction workers stop in the forest, whisper a few words of respect to the trees, and then cut down the beam that would one day give birth to a family. The smell of rain blends with the smoke from the fireplace, creating an ancient and down minus earth scent. Water drips down every night and gathers in the muddy pond at your feet. The villagers moved slowly in the drizzle, carrying buckets and covering them with firewood, checking the tightness of the ropes on the rooftops. Every drop is a small test. People know that a weak spot may mean destruction tomorrow morning. The records in the monastery archives mention that in addition to straw, medieval builders also used various types of roof coverings. In wealthier areas, wooden or stone shingles are used, although these require sturdy beams to support their weight. Lead plates sometimes covered the church roof, shining like dark silver in the rain. That for most people, straw, reeds or heather remain their choices. These materials are very light, rich and forgiving. If the thatch leaks, you mend it. If it rots, you just replace the part. It's not perfect, but it's human. Architectural historians are still discussing how much of the roof design in the Middle Ages originated from experimentation and how much from inherited wisdom. Perhaps the villagers don't consider this a building at all. It's just an instinct passed down from generation to generation. However, the result is self-evident. Many of the same principles still exist in today's British farmhouses. Centuries later, Margaret Thatcher learned to listen to the rain. She squatted under the shade of a tree, watching the brook flow along the straw like a glass thread. Rhythm hypnosis, stable and soothing. Inside, you can hear low voices, laughter mixed with the rubbing of wooden spoons in the bowl. The roof blocked the merciless grey above, blocking this warm world. A rather touching folk custom is that when a building is completed, a small bunch of flowers or herbs is placed at the highest point of the roof. This is a feeling of gratitude and a blessing for the family. In some villages, a stalk of wheat is tied to the roof ridge to commemorate the harvest, which makes the roof possible. Centuries later, people will still find these hidden bouquets, dry and fragile, concealed beneath layers of straw. You reached out and grabbed a handful of raindrops, dripping from the edge of the thatch. It's very cold, but very clean. Villagers sometimes collect this runoff in wooden barrels to use for washing or brewing beer. The rainwater on the new thatched roof is regarded as the purest water, as if the straw not only filters out dirt but also misfortune. You wash your hands clean and watch the water droplets fall back into the mud, vanishing in an instant. By around 10 a.m., the rain had weakened and turned into a thin mist, seemingly suspended in the air. The village looked very peaceful, and its rooftops sparkled like wet wool. The smoke rising from the chimney was pale and lazy. You will realize that the entire settlement largely depends on these angles and materials. Why are each slope and curve the answer to the same question? How do you live under a sky that never stops crying? The air in your little house feels warm now. The flames hissed and a few drops of water dripped from the smoke hole. You smiled, knowing that even the best roof can leak. You put your eye under the dripping water and listened to the steady jingling sound of the water. Strangely enough, this sound was comforting and reminded people that the outside world was still alive. Night fell and the rain started again, and this time it was even heavier. It tapped on the thatched roof, like the fingers of a drum, loud and rhythmic. You cover your shoulders with the blanket and close your eyes. The roof was groaning, the wind was humming, and the water was flowing gently. This is a storm, but it doesn't feel much like a threat, it's more like a song. The song of survival reverberated among the straw in the woods. You drift into the dreamland, where the melody of the rain blends with the slow heartbeat of the fire. The storm passed, and the world was damp and silent. Smoke rose from each chimney, hanging low over the village like a grey blanket. You walked outside and felt the faint warmth of the soil beneath your boots. The sting on the ground is enough to soften. The rooster crowed again. This time it sounded very proud, and you couldn't help laughing. The air was filled with the smell of soot and wet straw, heavy yet vivid. According to the records of several investigations, medieval villages were built together not merely for convenience. Proximity means protection, which can fend off both invaders and the cold. The walls of one house sloped towards those of the other, blocking the wind and keeping the warmth between the two houses. Each cabin becomes a small part of a larger body, breathing and warming together. This is an accidental project, stemming from needed habit rather than design. You walk through the narrow alley between the houses, your shoulders brushing against the damp walls. The distance between them is only enough for two people to pass through. There is a faint smell of smoke, cabbage and animal in the air. Somewhere, a baby is crying. The sound seemed to reverberate among the woods. In the space between the two rooftops, a wooden beam stretches overhead, almost touching both sides. It feels as if the entire village is holding hands and standing upright. In the local parish's writings, there is a pleasant but strange detail that describes how villagers sometimes share walls with their neighbors. A single wooden frame to form the boundary between two families, saving wooden time. The result was a strange intimacy. When someone next door coughs or laughs, you can hear it clearly. Privacy is a luxury that no one possesses. However, everyone felt warm. Archaeological excavations of medieval settlements have shown that houses usually faced central green spaces or shared areas. In winter, there is a fire burning and it is guarded by a night watchman or anyone who can't sleep. The flames were reflected on the walls of the surrounding farmhouses, transforming the village square into a huge public fireplace. People gather together to share news, fix tools and exchange small favors. Even in the darkness, they can find light in each other. Scholars continue to discuss to what extent this intimate relationship has shaped the spirit of rural life in Britain. Some people say it promotes cooperation and resilience, while others believe it breeds tension and gossip. Both might be correct. When everyone lives just a few steps away from others, kindness and conflict will grow from the same soil. However, in winter, under the pressure of common survival, the disputes became milder. You stopped in front of an old woman's hut. The door was only slightly open, and the smell of toasted bread wafted out. Entering the room, she waved you closer, her hands sprinkled with flour. Beside the stove was a small oven slightly larger than the clay urn. The bread was baking inside, and the crispy crust made a faint cracking sound. After it's cooked, she gives you a slice, steaming hot and fragrant. The taste is simple and sweet. She smiled, and you noticed that her breathing formed small clouds that vanished before reaching the ceiling. Literature records that bread ovens are sometimes shared by families. Not every family can afford it, so families take turns baking. After the bread is baked, the heat in the oven will last for a long time. People often sleep beside it, enjoying the gradually fading warmth. The oven became a silent neighbor, adding another participant in the endless battle against the cold. On the coldest nights, in some areas, there is a strange custom of covering doors and windows with woven mats, or animal skins. Every household will put these things on the openings to block the wind. In wealthy families, thick tapestries also play the same role, but here, simplicity is dominant. Now, you stroke such a cushion with your fingers, and the smoke inside makes it rough and warm. There is a smell of sheep and ash. You will notice how the paths in the village wind and twist around the old trees or wells. Nothing is straight. Each line bends towards the shelter. The village houses are crowded together like flocks of sheep, and the rooftops are almost joined together. The air between them is obviously warmer. You exhale and see less fog in your breath. This is not what you imagined. The entire village is like a long cloak, holding a heat that no single house can sustain. A group of children ran over, and their laughter echoed among the walls. A boy was holding a stick with a piece of cloth tied to its end, pretending that it was a torch. His friends followed behind, shouting the church sermon they vaguely remembered. The sound filled the narrow path, jumping from one house to another, until it felt as if the entire village was laughing. In the evening, the smoke from each chimney converges into a long ribbon and drifts towards the woods. The firelight reflected from the cracks inside the room illuminated the alley. You walk slowly, listening to the chorus of daily life, the sound of coughing, the clinking of bowls, and the gentle lullaby. Every sound falls into the next one, a patchwork of endurance. Now you realize that in medieval England, warmth was not merely a matter of fireplaces and rooftops. This is a product of intimacy, whether physical or between humans. The villagers built houses for each other. By doing so, they established a community that could withstand challenges that no one could face alone. You turn to your little house, whose walls are tightly pressed against your neighbor. Through the thin partition, you can hear the sighs of a baby and the hum of a woman. This sound makes you feel comfortable when you lie down. The fire around you is very low. The walls feel warmer, not because of the material, but because life gently beats outside the walls. Outside, frost has climbed onto the rooftops again, one after another, until the entire village is sleeping under a silver screen. The night was cold, but not cruel. It's not here. Every bit of warmth here belongs to everyone. The morning light slowly filtered through the gaps of the blinds, and a narrow golden line pierced through the smoke-filled air. You hear the gentle tapping outside, rhythmic and patient. The carpenter has already started working. His tools were neatly placed on a piece of cloth, along with a mallet, a narrow saw and a few iron nails. These items were extremely precious and he would count them before each work session. You walk into the fresh air and watch him shaping an oak beam. His hands carry a kind of ease and confidence that comes from years of repetition. In the architectural records of the Middle Ages, carpenters were among the most respected craftsmen in the village. They built houses, barns, carriages and even bridges. Their skills mean survival, while their mistakes may mean destruction. Each joint must fit closely. Every nail must be fixed in place. Without their hands, there would be no roof above their heads and no wall to shield them from the wind. You hear the sharp sound of the advertisement cutting wood. With each stroke, a wisp of pale shavings would be released, scattering like feathers on the frozen ground. The air is filled with the fresh scent of oak, fresh and refreshing. The carpenter hummed a tune in a low voice, keeping pace with his work. You can see the focused lines on his face. When he approaches the wood to check his mark, his breathing becomes blurred. In the works of some industry associations, there is an interesting detail that mentions that carpenters often add small carvings inside beams, which no one else can see except their colleagues. These tiny designs, sometimes human faces or animals, are the signatures and a way to leave something personal in the building. Centuries later, restorers discovered them hidden within walls and rafters, silent greetings from long-minus deceased artisans. Archaeological research has confirmed that the huge wooden frames of medieval houses were erected piece by mortise and tenon joints fixed with wooden bolts. Most structures do not require iron nails. This makes the building flexible enough to withstand moving ground and strong winds. This technology demands absolute precision. If the wood is nailed too tightly, it will crack. If it is too loose, the wall will bend. You can almost feel the balance of each strike of the mallet. Some researchers are still debating whether the shape of the medieval framework was more guided by tradition or mathematics. The carpenter's eyes, after decades of experience training, may have replaced geometry. However, when you look at the neat triangular beam standing before you, it is as perfect as any scholar's painting. Beauty does not lie in symmetry, but in the certainty of symmetry. You kneel beside the carpenter, watching him drill a hole with a bow drill. The soft sound of the tool blends with the rustling of leaves above your head. He works slowly and never in a hurry. He often stops to wipe his forehead, or test if the nails fit. His fingers are rough and cracked, but they are very stable. You know what he made was not just wood. He created the rhythm of the village one by one. Some builders follow a strange and ancient superstition of placing a coin or a charm under the first beam of a house. This is to bring good luck and protect the building from rotting. Coins are usually a small silver penny, but in poorer families, carved stones or dried flowers may be used as substitutes. Whether as a belief or a habit, practice shows that architecture and belief have always been inseparable. The carpenter straightened up, looking at his work and squinting his eyes towards the light. The beam is ready, smooth, pale, with blurry black lines marking the position of the next cut. Around him, the air was filled with the sounds of other work, the crackling of fire, the babbling of carts, and the chattering of villagers moving supplies. You will realize that every hammer strike, every joint, and every piece of wood connects one person to another in the network of survival this winter. In the method records, the carpenter's remuneration is usually not coins, but food, shelter, or clothes. Some people even temporarily live in the houses they have built, with their beds hidden under the unfinished roofs. This makes sense. The craftsman who creates warmth also needs warmth himself. The villagers relied on his skills, and in return, he also relied on their kindness. When the carpenter applied a thin layer of asphalt to the end of the beam to prevent moisture, the smell of sap filled your nostrils. The dark resin sparkled in the morning light, thick and fragrant. It is a faint smell of pine wood and smoke, which is the scent of preservation. The craftsman wiped his hands on his apron and smiled. His work today will continue for a long time after the storm passes. When he and his assistant lift the crossbeam to the right position, you stand behind. The air was filled with shouts and the deep groans of the wood under pressure. The scene rose slowly, capturing the light, just like a skeleton stretching towards the sky. When the last wooden stake slid into the hole, the carpenter stepped back, made a cross and nodded contentedly. By nightfall, the building was completed, in sharp contrast to the backdrop of sunder. The smell of wood lingered there, mingled with sweat and laughter. The carpenter sat by the stove, sharpening the knife, moving slowly and skillfully. He doesn't talk much, but you can sense the calm pride emanating from him. The house now has its bones, which will keep it warm for generations to come. You walk home along the street in the sky with the pale clouds. The wind had stopped and the village was quiet. In the distance, you can see the silhouette of the new frame on the horizon, strong yet simple. It is more than just a refuge. This is the promise carved on the oak tree. You smile, knowing that when the snow falls again, the beams will become soft yet strong, carrying the memory of the hands that shaped them. The dawn of the next day was in grey smoke and faint sunlight. The cold still enveloped the village, but it felt somewhat different. A strange new smell was floating in the air, more pungent and metallic than wood smoke. You followed it to a nearby hut where a small group of people had gathered. They were watching a mason and a blacksmith quarreling gently over a pile of freshly fired bricks. It will take you some time to understand what you were looking at. According to the existing records from the late 13th century, chimneys began to gradually appear in British households. Before this, the smoke rising from the open fireplace only drifted out through holes in the roof or windows without glass windows. The idea of guiding it through the shaft was revolutionary. It not only changed the structure of the house, but also the way people lived in it. For the first time ever, families can light fires against the wall instead of in the middle of the floor. This means smaller rooms, warmer spaces and cleaner air. The mason smashed the edge of the brick to test its hardness. The sound was sharp and rhythmic, reverberating along the nearby walls. Each brick is slightly uneven and is all handcrafted from the clay used to build the daub house. The color is a deep earthy red, still faintly warm from the kiln. The smell of iron from the blacksmith's stools mingled with the odor of wet plaster. You can taste the flavor of gravel in the wind. In an ancient guild ledger, there is a strange note mentioning that the earliest chimneys were regarded as a luxury, a symbol of modernization and status. When villagers walk past the newly built houses, they will be amazed by the fine smoke rising gently instead of rising from the broken roofs. That must have been a tiny miracle, an invention that separated smoke from life. Archaeological evidence supports the slow transformation. At first, only the upper class and wealthy townhouses had chimneys. Chimneys were usually huge buildings made of stone with trumpet-shaped tops to prevent sinking air currents. Farmers' families have been using open fireplaces for generations. This transformation took several centuries, but it began at such a moment. The mason carefully placed the bricks, which aroused people's curiosity about the way air flows. Researchers are divided over who first introduced chimneys to the UK. Some people say that it was influenced by the Norman conquest. Others, however, believe that it developed independently due to necessity. It is certain that this change involves both architectural and social aspects. Chimneys ensure privacy. Independent rooms can now have their own fires, and each one is small and enclosed. Family members can sleep separately, breathe more easily, and won't be choked by soot in their drains. When the workers were building floor by floor, you squatted beside them. Under the mason's phone, the plaster made a soft sound. The chimney is narrow and tall. The dim sky is set against a pillar of hope. The villagers whispered in agreement, although some seemed somewhat skeptical. Some people whispered that the smoke would enrage the family members. Old habits are hard to change. A pleasant yet strange belief that has been passed down from that period holds that fairies and guardian deities would travel through the smoke. Some villagers refused to cover their chimneys, fearing that it would block the way for invisible guests. Even though architecture has developed, superstition has found a way to coexist. By noon, the entire structure was completed. The mason stepped back, wiped his hands, his face covered with soot and pride. Although the chimney is slightly tilted, it still stands upright. A boy climbed onto the roof and shouted, and a wisp of smoke rose into the cold air. The crowd cheered softly, half in amazement and half in disbelief. Inside the small house, the difference is immediate. The air feels fresher. As the new air current blew fresh air into the room, the fire in the stove burned even more vigorously. You sat by the stove, took a deep breath, and for the first time realized that the smoke no longer stung your eyes. The light of the flames jumped higher, painting the newly built brick building orange. It feels like watching progress take shape on its own. It is well pointed out in ancient family records that chimneys reshaped the way people built furniture and arranged their houses. Now that there is a fire on the wall, there is space in the center of the room. Benches, tables, and beds can be placed closer together to make the interior more comfortable. The new warmth has also changed their behavior. People stay indoors for a longer time, reading or praying in more stable light. They no longer regard winter as an enemy, but more as a season to endure. You glanced at the shaft of the chimney and watched the sparks hovering in the darkness. They rose like fleeting stars, tiny and bright, and then vanished into the morning sky. Outside, wisps of smoke rose gently, elegant and serene. The mason closed his tools and examined his work carefully. When he said that each brick was a solid flame, his voice was very low, almost devout. Do you understand what he means? Chimneys are both pipes and guardians, the boundary between human warmth and endless coldness. As night fell, the air outside smelled fresher. The hut was faintly glowing, and the new chimney was smoking in the twilight. This image gives people a different feeling. In one sense, it is older, while in another sense, it is strangely younger, as if innovation has injected new life into the ancient bones. You walk home under the new skyline, where each hearth is covered with slender feathers, marking that you have learned to climb upwards. In your own little house, you sit beside the equally simple fire, imagining the feeling of the clean air tearing away the smoke. Now you are breathing in smoke, listening to the faint hissing sound of the burning wood. You think that change always starts with a spark. The snow has stopped, leaving behind a serene glow that might hurt your eyes at first glance. The village sparkled, and every roof was bathed in light. You noticed that the window panes of a nearby small house were shimmering with a faint frost. When the light shines on something dim and uneven, you realize that glass is not glass at all. You approached curiously, and found that the window was made of semi-transparent thin sheets scraped from the corners. Historical references in the memorial list confirm that genuine glass windows were rare in medieval England and were reserved for cathedrals, monasteries, and the wealthiest estates. For others, horn is the best substitute. The cow or its horn is soaked, flattened and thinned until light can pass through. It brought a pale, waxy glow to the room, dim and steady. When you touch it, its surface feels a bit greasy, and even in cold weather, your fingers will feel warm. Indoors, the windows filter the sunlight into a soft golden hue. The air has become softer and the shadows are not so dazzling. The children sit beside it, mending nets and toys by the faint light. The air was filled with the scents of beeswax and wood smoke, blending into a faint sweetness. You can hear the faint wind outside, which is covered by the thin skin of the caller. It's not perfect, but it turns the cold light of winter into something endearing. An unusual little detail was discovered in the notes of a 16th-century craftsman, which mentioned that some people rubbed the glass of the horn with butter to make it clearer. The result was temporary, that for a few days the outside world looked very bright, as if spring had come very early. You can almost imagine the joy of a family seeing colors again after weeks of gloom. Archaeological discoveries have confirmed that even before horns, parchment, or oil liners soaked thin linen were used to cover window openings. These materials could block air currents, while allowing faint light to pass through. Every corner was filled with the smell of oil, mingled with the scents of smoke and food. Such windows cannot be opened, so smoke seeps in through the gaps in the roof or the door. Nevertheless, they are still very precious. Even if there is only a tiny opening covered with a corner and oilcloth, it means that this home belongs to a person who survives, not just indoors. Historians are still debating when small glass plates began to appear in rural England. Some people claim that in the early 15th century, their spread extended beyond monasteries. Others, however, believe that they were very rare before the TUDI era. What everyone agrees on is the symbolic weight of the window. Adding one means hope, his ability and connection with the outside world, even in the cold winter. You sat beside the horn glass, watching the changes in light as the clouds passed overhead. The surface undulates slightly like frozen water. Behind it, you can see some blurry figures moving in the snow. A person was carrying firewood, while a dog was running behind him. Everything outside looks very soft, like a dream. The window blurs the cruelty of the world, turning it into art. In some villages, there is a strange superstition that one should not look directly out of the window at sunrise to avoid getting sick or sad. Perhaps it is because people are accustomed to closing the blinds to keep warm, or perhaps it is because people are afraid of the ghosts wandering at dawn. Even so, there are still some brave people who will lift the wooden blinds just in time for the first ray of sunlight in the morning, believing that this can give strength to the soul. The carpenters who made these frames cut oak or ash into simple squares. The horn pieces are fixed with thin lead strips or wooden strips. When you observe carefully, you will find some minor flaws. There are scratches here, bubbles there, and a thin slit at the overlapping part of the two pieces. The craftsmanship is rough but very fine. Each flaw tells a story about effort and adaptation. Inside, a young girl was drawing shapes on the corner glass with her fingertips. Her breathing made the water surface misty. She drew a sun and smiled slightly. The image vanished almost immediately, but for a moment it emitted a golden glow. You can feel the fragile tenderness at that moment. The impulse of human beings to adorn even the poorest things with hope. The window also changed the sound of the room. Without the outdoors, sounds become softer and the world becomes quieter. You can hear your own breathing, the crackling of the fire, and the gentle dripping of melting snow outside. The air gives people a suffocating feeling, as if the house itself has taken a deep breath and decided to keep it. In wealthier families, glass panes are eventually installed in lead frames called window flaps. They sparkled in the candlelight, casting tiny colorful patterns on the wall. Tourists will be amazed at them and touch their surfaces with reverence. But in this small hut, even the horn has a sacred meaning. It gives shape to light, turns survival into a kind of beauty. You went out again and took a look at the other little houses. Most houses have no windows at all, only small blinds that can be opened briefly during the day. Smoke rose gently from the chimney, dyeing the surrounding snow grey. There was a smell of sawdust and wet straw in the air, a smell of life surviving in the cold. When dusk fell, a soft glow filtered through the angular window glass, faint and golden. From the outside, it looks like a small lantern in the snow. You stood there for a while watching it flicker, and then turned and walked towards the fire. Now you understand that people in this era are not living in darkness. It's not true. They bring light into their homes, even if the sky forgets to bestow it. The air outside was pungent, but the room was full of vitality. The moment you open the door, a mixture of smoke, pit, butter and damp wall surrounds you. This is a scent that is both heavy and comforting, just like the warm memory itself. Take a breath and you'll understand that spending a winter in medieval England was like living in a world of scents, each telling its own story of survival. Family records from the 14th century documented the daily use of peat, wood and dry manure as fuel. Each one leaves its own fragrance. The air was filled with a deep and lasting earthy smell, while the oak trees emitted a fresher and sweeter smoke. The temperature at which the manure burns is surprisingly stable, with almost no flame, but the smell will stick to the clothes for several days. When the door opened, these smells wafted into the alleys of the village, carrying a map to know who was burning what. Is it near the fire and noticed how lazily the smoke curled up before escaping from the opening above. The cigarette ash accumulated on the wall for many years has turned into black stripes. In the layers of darkness, you can almost understand time itself, just like the growth rings on a tree. The floor was scattered with the rush grass that had been replaced last week. Now there is the fragrance of vanilla. Although their scent is faint, it penetrates the strong smell and brings a refreshing feeling to the room. It is a common practice to mix lavender, sage and meadow herbs in the rush grass on the floor. Records from noble families show that this tradition even spread to simple huts, although farmers used anything that grew nearby. When rush grass is trampled, the oil releases a subtle smell, masking the musty smell of the soil and smoke. The floor not only serves as an insulating layer, but also as a perfume carpet that changes with the seasons. One strange custom mentioned in several folk tales is to burn dried orange peels or apple peels in the fireplace to add sweetness to the room. Oranges traded from distant places are both rare and precious. But even if just one orange peel falls on the hot coal, the entire small house will be filled with fragrance. The villagers believe that this fragrance can invigorate the family and promote physical health. You can almost hear the hissing sound of the skin touching the fire. A small luxury item has turned into perfume. Archaeological research has found traces of butter and beeswax on the walls and ceilings, indicating that the smell of burning candles is constant. Butter made from animal fat gives off an iron stinky smoky smell, especially when the wick is smoking. In wealthy families, beeswax candles burned cleaner and the room is filled with a faint sweetness. The differences are astonishing. The poor live in the smoke of sour smoke, while the rich breathe in the sweet air. Some experts are still debating whether people merely tolerate the strong odors in their daily lives or attach great importance to them. To modern people, they might seem unpleasant. However, for those who lived in that era, they were safe scents. Smoke means fire. Fire means warmth. Even the stench of wet wool being dried by the stove meant that someone had survived the storm and put it on again. Take a deep breath and immediately grasp all the clues. The earth, the woods, the smoke, the herbaceous plants, and some kind of faintly visible animal. It is not perfume, but a life refined into fragrance. The warmth of the fire deepened it, filling your lungs and reminding you that this air, heady and imperfect, is what keeps people alive. In some medieval family manuals, a rather odd practice was described. That is, sprinkling malt liquor on the fireplace before making a fire, which was said to ensure a pleasant aroma. Some people claim that it makes the smoke milder. Some people also say that this is just to pray for good luck. No matter what its purpose is, the sizzling sound of the beer on the hot coal must have brought a brief joy to the cold morning. Now, the taste of the food has joined in. A pot of soup was simmering slowly, giving off waves of steam. Before you touch the spoon, you can smell the scents of onions, barley and vanilla in the air. The smell of the boiling broth mingled with the smoke, seeping into the rush grass and clothes, until it became part of the family structure. When you sit down, you will notice that every smell has its place in the rhythm of life. There was a smell of ashes and wet straw in the morning. The afternoon was filled with the sweetness of cooking. The night brings a stronger smell of butter and wool. The season itself alters the scent of the home, and people learn to look at the air as if it were a calendar. Now you realize that to survive in this world, you not only have to endure the cold, but also the smell. There is a kind of comfort hidden in the thick layer of smoke. The fire in the stove hissed gently, the reeds crackled beneath your feet, and the scent of earth and life swirled around you like a cloud. Outside, it was late at night and frost began to climb onto the window panes. Inside, the flavors of peat and vanilla became stronger, more intense. almost sweet. Close your eyes, breathe slowly, and let the warmth sink into your chest. The air is imperfect, murky and full of vitality. It silently tells you that this house is still breathing, still providing shelter, and still remembering. The wind changed direction. You can hear it from the way the smoke moves. It curls to the side instead of going straight up. Outside, snow piled up on the monotonous ridge, trampled by the sound of hooves and boots. In the small house, there is a feeling of movement, just like breathing. You turned around and saw its source. A pig, content, half asleep and half awake, snuggled up in the straw beside the low wooden partition. Its gentle gurgling sound mingled with the crackling of the fire. The air was filled with the smell of hay, manure and warmth. Family records and agricultural literature from the 13th century described how farmers shared their homes with their animals in winter. The reason is very simple. Livestock are very precious and should not be lost due to frost or theft. But there is also a hidden benefit. The heat from their bodies made the temperature in the cabin higher than that of any fireplace. In many villages in the UK, pigs, goats, chickens and even calves spend the coldest months with their owners. You watch the pig toss and turn in its sleep, giving off a faint glow in the fire-rail light. The air was filled with its warmth, a kind of living isolation. In the corner, the goat was lazily chewing old straw, and the bell was jingling gently. You can hear the rhythmic breathing of a cow, slow and deep, a heartbeat composed of breaths. These animals are quiet and comfortable, and in any sense, they're part of the family. There is a strange and charming note in a medieval diary, which mentions that children were oft unlulled to sleep by the breathing of cows. That low and steady rhythm comforted them through the long night when the wind blew against the wall. Some people even believe that sleeping beside a cow will give them strength when they wake up in the morning. The line between superstition and practicality has blurred, as often happens. Archaeological evidence supports the view that the animal pen was directly built into the structure of the house. You can still find traces of these layouts in the ancient ruins, with a raised fireplace on one side and sleeping mats on the other, separated from wild beasts by rough planks or woven partitions. The floor is covered with a layer of straw, which can absorb both heat and waste. It is only replaced when it is too dirty to bear. This wasn't elegant, but it worked. Researchers continue to discuss how people balance hygiene and necessities. Some people believe that the close relationship between animals and humans leads to diseases, while others think that warmth saves more lives. In that winter, it was hard to imagine that someone would attach so much importance to theory. You just did what the weather allowed. The room was filled with tiny noises, such as the sound of a pig's stuffy nose, the faint cackling of a chicken moving on its perch, and the hissing of the fire. Even from a few feet away, you can still feel their warmth. It's not just hot. It is an existence that reminds us that survival is shared. The air was filled with the smell of hay and smoke, which was unpleasant by modern standards but full of humanity. In some commemorative records, something called beast horns was mentioned, which was the part of the hut closest to the door. This makes cleaning easy. The animal's breathing heats the incoming air before it spreads throughout the room. He looked at the corner where the animals were lying and noticed that the frost on the inner wall had melted, while the opposite wall was still shining. Warmth really emanated from them, like a second fire. In northern regions, there is a special habit of speaking softly to animals before going to bed. This habit is called night talk. The villagers whispered blessings or words of gratitude to their cattle and pigs, believing that these kind words would make them more peaceful at night. Now try to say it. Just murmur a few syllables gently, and the pig will snort approvingly and turn to the side. The air feels a little warmer. The family gathered by the stove. The father was making a fire while the wife was mending her torn sleeve. When a hen jumped towards the flames, the children giggled. It seems that no one minds keeping company with wild beasts. It feels as natural as smoke and fire. The animals looked at them curiously and calmly, which was part of the rhythm of the night at home. It is recorded that some families even built sinks in their porches to feed animals without letting cold in. The boundary between the barn and the residence is almost indistinct. The human world and the animal world breathe together. Close your eyes and listen to the voice of life. The crackling sound of wood, the croaking of oxen, the rustling of the wind outside, and the steady breathing of sleeping people or other animals. This is a tenacious quiet. You begin to understand that warmth is not only produced by fire, but also comes from the closeness of living beings, from the slow air exchange and comfort between species. The fire was burning very low and the hut became dim. You pull the blanket tighter and feel the vibration of the animals moving in their sleep. The air is filled with the earthy scent of life, primitive and genuine. The thatch outside was covered with thick frost, but the breath inside the house made the air misty in the soft clouds. Warmth is not perfect or pure, but it is enough. When your eyelids become heavy, the pig gurgles gently. The goat sighed. Somewhere in the darkness, a hen let out a cry and then stopped. You smile in half light and half darkness, knowing that you won't freeze tonight. You will fall asleep in warmth, breathing, humming and dreaming with it. When you wake up, the flame is merely a red whisper beneath its blanket of ashes. Your breath is still misty, but the cold is not as cruel as before. The air felt thicker and more stuffy, as if the little house itself had learned how to keep warm. Stand up straight and run along the wall beside you with your hands. The soil and straw are cold but not frozen. Someone filled the gaps between the woods with moss, which felt very elastic. You realize that this small act of patience prevented the frost from invading. Your written records of medieval architectural guides and monastery accounts tell us that long before this term came into being, people began to use simple materials for insulation. Dry moss, woolen bundles of straw were stuffed into the cracks in the walls and roofs. When they are filled in, they form a barrier against air flow and rain. In autumn, every household works together to collect these things, for they know that by January, these things might mean the difference between comfort and pain. He knelt on the ground to examine the base of the wall. There was more moss between the stones. It gives off a pale green scent, a memory of the frozen forest floor beneath the snow. The rafters were wrapped in linen to prevent the melting frost from dripping down. The wind outside has softened and is no longer sharp. The cabin feels quieter, like a cocoon. In the villages of the north, there is an unusual custom that describes how people hang thick fabrics or woven mats on the inner walls. These curtains are not merely for decoration but serve an insulating function. In wealthy families they became tapestries embroidered with hunting scenes or saints. In poorer farmhouses, there were simple linen clothes or old cloaks. Even so, they still changed the atmosphere of the room, transforming it from a space for survival into a place for rest. Archaeological evidence of well-preserved medieval houses shows that these small holes were once the places where wooden stakes were used to secure these wall hangings. When they were rebuilt, the differences were immediate. The sound became softer, the air warmer, and the flickering firelight emitted a softer glow. You can imagine sitting here centuries ago, outlining the creases of the fabric when the storm howled outside. Some modern historians debate how conscious these choices were. Did the villagers consider this from the perspective of insulation, or was it merely a habit? Perhaps both are present. They may not have words about thermal resistance, but they understand the feeling of wind passing through walls. Instinct tells them to use whatever they can find to block it. The ancient family record retains a strange detail, telling that the family also spread rush grass mixed with dried herbs, such as rosemary and lavender on the floor, not only to release fragrance, but also to capture the heat rising from the fire. Rush grass absorbs the heat during the day and slowly releases it at night. This is their version of the heated floor, simple, yet splendid. You approach the fireplace, fiddling with the ashes until a faint orange glow appeared. Warmth is growing, though small. It is indeed so. Someone hung a blanket at the door. Every time the wind blew, it would sway slightly. Behind it, the animals were moving, their hooves gently rubbing against the straw. This sound reminds you that insulation is not only present on walls, but also in the way people arrange their lives. Every corner of the cabin is part of the same design. Each space is used to store heat. It is recorded that people in the Middle Ages also used multiple layers of bedding to keep warm. They spread straw or even dried ferns under coarse wool blankets, and then covered them with old cloaks or sheepskins. These layers trap the air, forming the primitive version that modern scientists call a hot bag. Its effect is simple yet powerful. It can keep people alive when they wake up rather than stiff and pale. In a 15th-century letter, there is a strange story about a person boasting that he could sleep through any winter like an onion. Of course, what he meant was to wrap himself layer upon layer of fabric until he could hardly move. Whether real or exaggerated, this photo captures the human element for seeking comfort under impossible conditions. Now stand up and bring your hand close to the wall to test the air. The difference between the inside and the outside is astonishing. The cold was like a fist pressing on the outside of the neck, but the air inside remained stable, still being touched by the heat of the fire last night. You know, warmth is not a single act, but a defense built and rebuilt in countless tiny ways every day. Some ancient monastery records mention the monk's habit of hanging woolen curtains around his bed in winter, creating small rooms in the hall without heating. Even the poorest villagers would put on their extra cloaks in their sleeping places in their own way. Privacy and warmth are the same thing. As the sky deepened, the farmhouse was filled with a peaceful life. Someone takes care of the animals. Their footsteps were covered by the straw. The moss on the wall gave off a faint green glow under the dim light. Bubbles were gently rising from the pot and steam was curling up. Now there is no sharp smell in the air anymore, only a slow and even warmth. You sat by the stove and once again placed your hand on the wall. Under your palm, you can feel the pulse of life in the soil, straw and moss. It's not perfect, but it's very effective. This wall breathes, as if it came from the forest. You smiled, realizing that isolation was not invented by science, but discovered by human hands, through experimentation, through patience, and through a peaceful understanding that even the smallest things can keep death at bay. Outside, the trees are covered with frost. There will no longer be fog in your breath. You wrapped the blanket tightly around your shoulders, lean towards the embers and let the warmth rise. The same warmth always belongs to those who learn to listen to the walls. The night in the hall was very long. The air was filled with a quiet hum, a kind of stillness that only emerged after hours of noise and feast. You walked gently across the floor covered with rush grass, hearing a faint rustling sound under your boots. The hall still smelled of grilled meat and spilled malt liquor, but the flames in the center had gone out and turned into burning coal lumps. The shadows like a thick curtain stuck in the corner. The records of medieval manors describe these halls as the centers of magical life. They are not only restaurants, but also bedrooms, workplaces and gathering places. The servants of the Lord, the servants, and sometimes the guests all lived under the same roof, only with different habits and furniture. Under the distant canopy, the Lord and his family slept on the raised platform. The rest of the people sat in the empty seats, wrapped in cloaks or lying beside the embers to keep warm. You approached the fireplace. The flames crackled faintly, and a deep orange heart was still beating in the ashes. The light it emitted was just enough to show the vastness of the hall. The wooden beams arched overhead like ribs, and the banner hummed feebly in the smoke-filled air. The walls were covered with shields and hunting spoils, outlining vague outlines in the flickering light. You can almost hear the ghostly echoes of the singing and laughter that filled the room earlier. In a list from the 15th century, an interesting note mentioned that the rush grass on the floor was often mixed with fragrant herbs, not only for the smell, but also to mask the decay of the whole. After a long night of eating and drinking, they absorbed the grease, smoke and the warmth from many people's feet. In the morning, the smell of minted mint and rosemary wafted along with the smoke from the reignited fire. This is an ancient trick, simple yet elegant. The archaeological reconstruction of the hall shows that even these grand spaces are not truly warm. The high ceiling trapped the heat above people's heads, and the airflow seeped in through the heavy door cracks. The fireplace provides light and comfort to those closest to it. But just a few steps away, breathing turned into fog. The servants wrapped themselves in cloaks, and the dog curled up on its master's lap, sharing the same heat. Some historians debate whether these halls are symbols of communities or hierarchies. God sat in a brilliant light, his chair closest to the fire, and the servants slept on the poldest edge. However, everyone was breathing the same smoke and waking up to see the same grey dawn. The big fire made them both united and divided. You are sitting on the bench beside the fire that is about to go out. The coal lumps shine like hidden gems, and their faint heat caresses your skin. Somewhere in the shadow, Someone is snoring softly. Another cough. Even in the silence, the hall was brimming with vitality. You hear the sound of the wind pushing the blinds, and the sound of something gently stirring on the beams. Perhaps it's a pigeon or a mouse looking for breadcrumbs. The size of the flame cast a brief flash, painting the wall golden, and then vanished. One strange custom mentioned in the chronicle of the monastery is that the guards sleep straight in the hall with their spears placed beside them. They were originally meant to prevent intruders or fires, but many just dozed off, their dreams illuminated by embers. Chroniclers joke that the warmth of the fireplace would make the most loyal forget their duties. You can almost see them now, half awake, with flames reflected in their half-open eyes. The hall was very quiet. Apart from the rhythm of breathing, dozens of soft sounds merged together. Everyone here, whether nobles or servants, is wandering between wakefulness and sleep in the same orange glow. This gives people a strange sense of intimacy. The common weakness under the roof beams. You will feel that in such a place, warmth does not come from the fire, but from the closeness of others. There are abundant historical records indicating that this hall was used to display the power of God. The guests judged his wealth by the size of the fire and the quality of the wood on it. However, even the most intense flames can make the corners cold. Some halls had tried to use stone fireplaces and metal grills to draw in more air, which were just a small step toward improving efficiency in the centuries before science explained the reasons. You admire their perseverance. There is a peculiar detail in an ancient family record. Keeping cats in these halls is not only for catching mice, but also because their presence is believed to calm down sleeping people. Their snoring is believed to stabilize the heart and relieve nightmares. You glanced at the edge of the firelight and saw a cat curled up in its cloak, its eyes half-open, shining like to embers. It was late at night and the wind outside was even stronger. The door got stuck and cold air slipped in through the gap. Someone stirred and threw another piece of wood into the fire. Mars leapt up, briefly illuminating the engraved crossbeam above. You see the faces of the sleeping men and women flickering in the light, calm and oblivious. Then darkness once again enveloped them. Lean back on the bench and close your eyes. The warmth caresses your face, gentle and lasting. The smell of smoke sticks to your hair and clothes. At this moment, you are a part of this great breathing space, this shared rhythm of exhaustion and endurance. The fire gradually died out, leaving only embers. The hall fell silent. Winter is getting closer and closer outside. However, the warmth inside still exists, captured by the air, this forest and the memories of the people who have rested here for centuries. In the same gloam, under the same light, you are surrounded by the steady pulse of human life, refusing to freeze. Dawn begins with the distant chimes. Its voice echoed in the frosty valley, steady and solemn. You opened your eyes and saw the pale light streaming in through the narrow window and the faint echoes of singing in the distance. The air was filled with the smell of damp stones and burning butter. You are no longer in a village, but within the walls of a monastery, a place where tranquility and discipline rule the day. Here, warmth is not a matter of comfort but of order. The records of medieval monasteries describe in great detail how the monks arranged their lives around prayer time and their struggle against the cold. Their thick stone buildings stand out from the cold, like memories. However, with their intelligence and faith, they successfully survived those winters that would break down weak souls. Every monastery is an experiment to strike a balance between spiritual simplicity and material survival. You followed the sound through a long corridor. The stones beneath your feet are so cold that they can numb your toes, even the leather soles. The moisture stuck to the wall and sparkled in the faint light. As you approach the church, the chanting grows louder and louder, but it has no warmth, only tranquility. When the monks sang, their breaths rose into small clouds and merged with the fragrance that filled the air. The aroma is pungent, sweet and smoky, penetrating the dampness like sunlight. In the factory, several candles were flickering on the grey stones. A monk scooped the porridge into a bowl, his movements slow and rhythmic. Where others were sitting, the bench creaked, and their habit gently brushed against the floor. No one spoke. Silence is like a second coat, separating them better than walls. Archaeological evidence shows that the monastery was one of the earliest places in medieval England to experiment with heating systems. Some pets build a small passage called flue under their floor to carry warm air from distant fires. Others use double walls to block the heat from the kitchen and workshop. These early innovations, though uneven in quality, were remarkable. Farmers relied on animals and their neighbors, while monks turned to construction and engineering. Among the ruins of the Fountain Monastery, there is a strange discovery, which reveals a room that was once called a greenhouse. It was the only source of fire in the monastery apart from the kitchen. The monks were only allowed to visit it briefly before returning to work to warm their hands. This is both a blessing and a temptation. Here, discipline meets kindness. You could almost see them standing around the fire. Their faces shone with an orange glow against the grey stones, and their breathing seemed like a prayer. Scholars continue to discuss how temples balance their vows of poverty with their need for comfort. Some people believe that warmth itself is regarded as a spiritual weakness, something that needs to be endured rather than pursued. Others pointed out that the monastery preserved architectural and craftsmanship knowledge, enabling the entire community to survive. In the pursuit of the mean, the monks might have accidentally discovered wisdom far more profound than they had expected. You walk towards the enclosed garden, where every leaf is covered with a silver frost. The air is still, and the entire world wanders between purr and silence. You brushed a frozen rose with your finger and watched it sparkle in the dim light. Somewhere, a monk coughed gently, and the sound echoed on the wall. Coldness is absolute, but so is tranquility. Glastonbury has a special monastic rule that requires brothers to sleep according to their own habits to maintain warmth and humility. Their woolen robes were thick and rough, filled with the smell of smoke and linseed oil. They wore simple linen blouses, sometimes stuffed with straw to keep warm. You can imagine rows of monks lying on wooden rays, each wrapped like a cocoon, breathing in unison. The fire outside might go out, but their shared breathing will keep the air vibrant. In the scriptorium, a monk bent over to look at the parchment, his fingers stiff from the cold. A small candle was flickering beside him, and the wax of the candle was pulled over the base. The quill was trembling in his hand, but the handwriting continued. Slow down, be careful. From time to time, he would stop to warm the ink or rub his hands. The narrow room was filled with ink stains and the smell of smoke. Centuries later, the characters he wrote remained sharp as if they were carved by cold hands. It is recorded that some mutants built their bedrooms above kitchens or bakeries, allowing heat to rise through the floor. The aroma of bread often wafts into their dreams. Every night they spend several hours falling asleep in the warmth and the faint sweetness of grains. You can imagine how those moments felt, just like standing on the edge of heaven after several days of cold. There is a rather touching anecdote in a chronicle of a monastery. It tells of a young new monk who tried to sneak a piece of coal from the kitchen into his cell and hide it in a piece of cloth to keep warm. When he was discovered, he confessed and was forgiven on the condition that he would share it with others. The ending of the story is that the two brothers found warmth in charity rather than in fire. The bell rang again, deep and resounding. The monks stood up from their work and walked towards the chapel. You follow behind, your footsteps echoing theirs. Although no new fire has been ignited, the air now feels lighter and warmer. Perhaps it's belief, or perhaps it's just a simple rhythm. The singing rang out again, churning in the cold air like the sound of flowing water. You stand at the door, watching the candle flickering on the stone. The monastery breathes in silence and order, and in the persistence of human will. The cold still exists, but heat has lost its cruelty. It has become part of discipline, part of a coarse warmth. Like sanctity, is not always given for free, but is gained through perseverance. Outside, under the pale Sunday sun, the frost sparkled. Inside, the monks sang softly, their voices rising and falling with the rhythm of the seasons. In that voice winter was almost gentle. The chimes gradually fell silent, leaving only the gentle echo of footsteps in the corridor. You walked out of Abbey's door and into the pale morning light. By the night the frost thickened, turning the grassland into a white crystal cup. Ahead lies a tall and solemn church, with its stone walls faintly shining in the Sunday sun. The air was bone-minus chillingly cold. However, when you push open the heavy wooden door, a different kind of chill greets you, still deep and sacred. As is well known, according to church records, Medieval churches were both spiritual centers and material sanctuaries. When the storm raged through the countryside, villagers gathered in these huge stone halls. The thick wall built for eternity can withstand both the weather and fear. They feel cold to the touch, but in a world of impermanence, they are unbreakable. You walked slowly through the nave, your footsteps echoing like a whisper. The air was filled with the scents of wax and stone, as well as the faint incense that wafted from yesterday's mass. A light filtering through the colorful small windows tinted the frost outside into soft reddened blue. You can see your breath, a ghost floating in the sacred air. Several villagers wrapped in rough cloaks knelt before the altar. Their prayers rose to the dome like a mist. Archaeological studies of medieval churches have revealed ingenious efforts to create warmth in these vast spaces. The floor is usually covered with straw or rush grass, which is replaced after festivals to keep it dry. Some larger churches have built small side chapels with low ceilings, and candles in people's bodies may absorb heat. The candle itself emits as much light as it does heat. Every flame is a resistance to the cold. There is an interesting note in a parish record of Lincolnshire, which mentions that parish residents sometimes wrapped their hot stones in cloth and carried them during the long winter sermons. Before dawn, these stones were placed in the fireplace to be heated and carefully transported to the church, with hands stained red by their hidden glow. To some extent, belief itself has become a portable warmth. Some historians continue to debate whether the coldness of medieval churches was intentional. Perhaps the cold is to humble the body, so that the spirit can transcend discomfort. Others, however, believe that this is inevitable under side effect of ambition. In any case, the experience of standing in these reverberating halls is not pain but art. The cold makes every sound sharp, every flame seem brighter, and every prayer heavier. You approach the altar, where candles flicker beside the carved cross. The air was filled with the gentle and comfortable fragrance of beeswax. The priest's voice came deep and steady from the shadows. His breathing could be seen in the dim light. The congregation knelt down, their heads lowered, and their cloaks rubbed against the floor. For a moment, everyone breathed together. The air is getting warmer. It could also be that your body is adjusting, finding peace in stillness. Several churches have recorded a strange custom, describing parish banquets held within these stone walls during the coldest winter. After the prayer, the villagers shared bread and malt liquor. Their laughter echoed over the rafters. The heat of the crowd, the smoke from the torches and the smell of food filled the entire building until the frost on the windows melted. This is both a form of worship and a way of survival, a warm exchange and an exchange of beliefs. You sat on the bench by the door, watching a few latecomers come in, shaking the snow off their cloaks. Their boots left wet marks on the stone. A dog was following one of them, curled up at the door, steam rising from its fur. The priest smiled but said nothing. Even animals seemed to be welcomed by the cold. According to the ancient church maintenance log, during long vigils, fire basins were occasionally used to light fires. Although this behavior was opposed by the clergy, the smoke would float onto the rafters and last for several days, dyeing the stones black. However, these stains that remain palely visible centuries later tell the story of the body seeking warmth and the soul seeking redemption. A peculiar story from the Yorkshire parish tells of villagers spending the night in a church during a fierce snowstorm. They huddled together beside the candles, singing hymns until dawn. Afterward, they said that the Virgin Mary had walked among them herself, bringing them warmth that they should have lacked. Whether true or not, this story has become part of the local faith and is retold every winter when frost descends. At the end of the ceremony, the pastor raised both hands and the congregation replied in soft whispers. Their voices echoed among the stone arches, mingled with the sound of the wind blowing through the door. You could feel that moment lingering in the air, fragile yet strong. When you step outside and into the dim room, the sunlight is dazzling. The cold has returned to you, but now it feels different. It's not as cruel as before. Behind you, the church stands quietly, its windows glowing faintly like the embers of the day. It is more than just a building. It is a crucible of the spirit. Its heat is invisible but long-minus lasting. You walk along the path towards the village. The air was filled with distant knocking sounds and laughter. The rhythm of life continues under the pale sky. The church bells rang again, their sound resounding across the earth, reminding everyone that warmth, faith and patience are often the same voice. When you left the countryside, the snow began to melt. The road turned into a muddy strip and the air was filled with a strong smell of smoke. Ahead, the small town rose from the fog like a forest of rooftops. The narrow houses lean against the winding street, and their upper floors are almost joined together. The chimes mingled with the gurgling and whispering of the carriage. It is precisely here, in the narrow heart of the medieval town, that the refuge has been given a new meaning. Municipal records from the 14th century show that the townhouses are narrow and tall, and each one is closely adjacent to its neighbors. Construction workers work within the limited spaces permitted by the city. The lower floors are shops or workshops. The room upstairs is used for sleeping and storage. The warmth of daily life gathers on the walls, and the heat of one family often seeps into another. Although these houses are crowded, they are warmer than open cottages. You walk under the wooden arch, and the air is filled with the smell of bread and candles. The sounds of chopping firewood and boiling water came from the open door. The streets are brimming with vitality, and the noisy sounds reverberate among the dense buildings. Will you touch the wall beside you? The plaster will feel warm. Behind it, a fireplace was burning, and smoke rose gracefully from the chimney, just like a heartbeat soaring into the sky. Archaeological research on medieval towns has confirmed that density itself became a barrier. To block the wind, the streets are very narrow and the houses share supporting beams. The roofs overlap in some places, forming shadow tunnels where rainwater rarely reaches the ground. These streets may look chaotic now, but they have been shaped by the survival instincts of centuries. Every crooked turn around must respond to coldness. A strange record from Yorkshire describes how neighbours sometimes build connecting doors between their attics, allowing warmth and gossip to pass freely. In the coldest winter, the entire row of houses turns into detached ones. Shared shelters, their occupants are bound together by need rather than friendship. You can imagine that laughter and complaints reverberated in the upstairs room, and the air was filled with thick smoke and stewed meat. In such a townhouse, you will find a family sitting around a small stove. The room was narrow and the ceiling was low, but it was steaming hot inside. A pot of barley and cabbage was bubbling over the fire. The window was tightly closed and covered with an oilcloth. The only light came from the flame and a small oil lamp on the shelf. You immediately feel warmth reaching your face, soft and intimate. According to the merchants' account books, urban residents burned coal earlier than rural residents. The trade routes along the river made transportation easier and the heat was stable. But the coal brought its own smell, sharp and sour, sticking to hair and clothes. Chroniclers in London complained that the smoke from cold arc in the sky and made the air bitter. However, no one gave up. Warmth is too precious. Some historians still question whether urban life is really more comfortable than rural life. Although townhouses can better retain heat, the air inside is often dirty, full of smoke and dust and breathing. To save fuel, the fire was very small and smoke lingered in the low room. However, people adapted and found a balance between the air and warmth, between the desire to breathe and the need to survive. You look towards the narrow staircase, where there is a ladder leading to the attic above. The higher you climb, the thicker the air becomes. In the attic, two children were sleeping under woolen blankets, their faces flushed red. The beams of the roof quivered gently in the wind. Outside, the distant chimes came in through the crack. Even at night, the city hums with the sounds of wheels, hooves and laughter playing a low lullaby. An unusual custom mentioned in the municipal regulations describes how residents use the flue to heat their walls, build vertical passages beside fireplaces, and transport smoke upwards while heating the plaster. This idea spread very slowly and eventually evolved into a primitive centralized heating method. Now you can feel the faint, warm pulse on the wall beside you, as if the house itself is breathing. It's below. Mother stirred the pot and added a pinch of dried herbs. The air was filled with a strong earthy smell. Father was mending wood shoes by the fire, tapping them gently with a hammer. This sound mingled with the hissing sound of cooking soup. This scene feels eternal, almost transcending history. The room emitted an orange light, like a small life island in the grey city. From outside, you can hear the voices calling each other across the narrow street. A businessman closed the blinds. Somewhere a woman smiled. The warmth of hundreds of fires on the roof merged into a cloud of smoke, which faintly glowed in the moonlight. There was a smell of coal, ashes and bread in the air. It's not clean, but it's full of vitality. You realize that the city is its own home. Every alley, every window, every shared wall is part of a single breathing organism that resists the cold. People may not think so, but the city knows. It keeps them united in every frost. When you walked out, the snow began to fall again, covering the narrow roof. A firelight shone in through the gaps of the blinds. You walked slowly along the street, listening to the warm echoes coming from every wall. The houses seemed to be getting closer together, as if they were also seeking comfort from each other. At that moment, the city didn't feel like stone or wood, but more like a beating heart in the depth of winter. You leave the narrow and warm main street and walk along the muddy path towards the edge of the town. The air became colder, sharper and thinner again. The sounds of the merchant and the hammer gradually faded away, leaving only the wind. Ahead, behind the last row of houses, the world became quieter and was forgotten. This is where the poor live. They are crammed onto the city walls and survive on a little warmth emanating from others' fireplaces. Historians in the late Middle Ages often wrote about this boundary between security and exposure. The town has city walls, but not everyone lives in them. The poorest workers, beggars, widows and vagrants built huts along the outside ditches, or near the city gates. Their dwellings were makeshift, usually made by piecing together discarded wood, broken carts, layers of rags or straw. When frost comes, the walls of these sheds become hardened, turn into fragile shells. You walk among these fragile houses, their roofs drooping under the frost. Smoke,